Hi guys, it's Josh from Just 3 Nerds, and today I'm going to be showing you some ways in which you can improve your performance in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Now before having my head caved in the comments, I'd like to say by no means am I some sort of pro Mario Kart player, but I can say I'm far better than average, so I definitely have some sort of thing which will be useful to you in some way if you want to get good. With that out of the way, let's get right into it with our first category. Categories will be timestamped in the description. Kart selection. The first thing you need to consider when improving your kart is, does your kart fit the way you like to play the game? There's no definitive best kart in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, which makes it very much down to you and your individual preferences as a driver as to what kart you go for. Before I go into how to make the kart better for yourself, I'm going to briefly cover the different stats of a kart and what it means for you. Speed. This is the overall top speed you can go. This is especially handy in straight lines and for building momentum into the corners. Acceleration. This is how fast you reach your top speed. Good acceleration means quick recovery after you get hit, enabling you to lose less time from mistakes and getting hit with other items. Weight. It affects how far you go off course when you drift and how much you're affected by other drivers who bump into you. Light karts get knocked around more. Heavier karts drift further off course but can bully other drivers off the road, negating the need for items. Handling. This is how close you stick to a corner and how much control you have over the direction of your vehicle when in a drift. When drifting, you have the ability to turn into a corner or turn out of it, and this affects the sharpness of the drift you're making. Generally speaking, bikes have better handling than karts. Traction. Traction is very similar to the off-road stat on the Wii, and it allows you to traverse routes off the main track faster. When trying to find the right kart for you, I find the best way is to go into time trials and start with something in the middle of the road with very average stats, then pick a track you know well. Set a time with the kart or drive until you get a good feel for how it drives, and then change it up a bit depending on what stats you might prefer. Keep altering and tweaking these stats until you're consistently lapping decent times. If you find you're struggling to keep a good line in the corners, try adjusting the weight and handling to be more suited to your style and so forth. Driving lines. The driving line is the route that you take around the circuit, with the idea being to drive along the most optimal of lines to get you around the track as fast as possible. I'm going to cover some of the main principles that allow you to get the most out of every part of the track. Keeping tight to the corners when drifting shortens the overall distance you travel around the track. If you're in a vehicle with quite a tight drift circle, you may be able to hug that inside line very closely and follow a line like this. If your drift isn't as manoeuvrable, then you may want to follow something a little closer to a more traditional racing line, like this. Overall, you want to be having your kart spend the most time as possible near the inside line and ensuring that you're next to it as you cross the halfway point of the corner, as this will mean you carry the most speed with you from the entrance to the exit without needing to slow down and stop. This will take time to work out what's best, as your karts will vary in the specific line they'll have to take due to different stats. Something that's somewhat of a small detail that I feel I need to mention is that something I see a lot of people do after I give them this tip is to drive normally down the straight and then swerve into the position to enter the corner and then start to drift. What you want to do instead is to be aiming for that corner entrance upon exiting the last corner you are at, so you slowly move diagonally but more or less in a straight line. This will save you a lot of time. Equally, if the corners are tight, ensure that the drift from the first corner ends at the start of the next. Knowing when and when not to drift is something that a lot of people already know, but to those that don't, this can be a game changer. It's a very specific thing, and under different circumstances, karts and tracks, you'll have to make individual judgments as you play. But to summarise it, I would say a good rule of thumb is to think to yourself, can I get a boost off this drift? If you can, go for it. If you can't, don't. With all this information in mind, watch time trials done by people better than yourself to learn what are the better lines to take for each track. This can be slightly more boring, but I've had many times myself where I've learnt a completely new way of tackling a part of a track that has seriously improved my lap times. If you're looking to specifically improve your driving lines and overall speed as a driver, then time trials are a good way to practice. They're not a good practice ground for overall race strategy and skills. However, if you're looking to perfect your driving technique, kart and style, then time trials is the way to go. Item management. One of the key differences between a good player and a great one is the way they manage their items and knowing when to hold items and when to fire. One of the best strategies that works for me is rotating my items out every time there's a box coming up, as seen in this clip. The theory behind this is the more you do this, the more items there are out on the track and the more obstacles there are for your opponents. All the while you have a full inventory of items to defend or overtake with. Instead of holding that banana or a shell out behind you for the duration of the race, fire it off in front or behind you just before hitting a new set of boxes. If it's just a single box, only get rid of one item, and if you have a coin in your second slot, it guarantees you're going to get a defensive item. Once you get these items, it may be tempting to fire them off immediately, but it's not always the best option to take. Knowing when to attack and when to defend is one of the most important parts of making your way up the field, as without it, you'll find yourself constantly flicking back between only a couple of places and struggling to break through to the front. Better times to attack are in areas you know aren't too far from an item box. This is because once you use your item, you are potentially leaving yourself defenseless, and you want to minimize the amount of time that you're vulnerable for. Vulnerabilities in Mario Kart are often easy to exploit, and you can use this to your advantage by making sure to hit vulnerable players you're struggling to pass as you go over glider sections or off-road shortcuts of the track. While it can be a lot of fun hitting your friends and screwing them over, a lot can be said for holding back your items too. If you know you're able to pass somebody through your driving and speed alone, don't feel you have to fire an item at them. Save it for defending against them when you pass, or for hunting down the next opponent ahead, as to not waste your items on someone you would have passed anyway. When it comes to defense, I tend to always have an item behind me if I'm in the middle of a group or there isn't much of a gap between me and the next person. This is because you are often too close to get a notification in time for you to do anything. You can also use an item to push people trying to overtake you out of the best driving line, as they will have to stay further away from you around corners, sometimes leading them to fall off the track or having to brake entirely. Something else which you'll be able to develop as time goes on is your ability to predict item boxes. Just because an item box has been taken, doesn't mean it won't be there by the time you get to it. By keeping an eye on how long it takes for the item boxes to respawn, you can learn to judge whether it's worth throwing yourself into an empty space in the hopes of it coming back just as you reach it. A lot of players will actively avoid going for boxes that aren't there, and because of this I find myself picking up double item boxes more frequently than I previously would have, and as we know from before, the more items you rotate through, the more damage you can dish out. One final thing in regard to items that often gets overlooked is coins. Coins can be the difference between places, as the more coins you have, the faster your kart will go. I personally always make my goal on the first lap to scrape up as many coins as I can, so I have a good level of speed heading into the second and third laps. Once you have a lot of coins, it makes it easier to get to the front. Once you get closer to the front, it's easy to keep your number of coins high, as item boxes with them are a lot more frequent. Aiming for coins on the first lap can be an annoying habit to get into, but it really helps once you get it down. Also, if you have a bad lap, don't worry, just focus on picking up coins for the remainder of the lap, and soon enough you'll be at the front again. Spatial Awareness. Spatial awareness is key for planning your moves regarding track position and item management. Knowing who and what is around you at all times can give you an advantage over other players not as aware as you, and allow you to outplay them through driving alone in a lot of scenarios. Now this skill area is a little harder to get used to compared to the others, as often it will lead you to be focusing on other stuff on top of what's already going on, so don't be worried if you struggle with it straight away, it will come in time. First, you want to stay on top of who is behind you and where they are. I typically like to do this by looking behind me on the exits of corners, heading into straights, and between the midway point and the entrance point to the next corner. I only do this for a short time, but just long enough for me to see where on the track the person behind me is positioned, how far back they are, and what items do they have. This can then inform me of where I should position myself on the track. For example, if I see someone directly behind me, I will move so they're behind me to the side. That way if they were to fire a green shell or a boomerang, it would most likely miss. Depending on what items they have will depend on how much you watch their position on the section you are on. However, even if I deem them to be non-threatening, I always check again midway to the entrance of the next corner, as things change very fast in Mario Kart and I don't want to get caught out. Getting into the habit of checking the minimap just after you check behind you can also save your race. It can give you a vital heads up to any blue shells, bullet bills and star users coming up fast behind you that you might not have seen when you were looking behind. Avoiding items. Many of the items in Mario Kart can be defeated with a simple defensive item like a shell or a banana. But what about those times when you find yourself without any items and something's coming your way? While not all items are easy to deal with, there are a few in which if you're lucky, you can outmaneuver to try and save yourself and a few seconds of lap time. Avoiding red shells may seem impossible without items, but there are certain ways you can avoid them. While red shells will track your position and move in on you, they can't turn very sharply. Because of this, if you know a red shell is closing in on you, try and make sharp swerves around track obstacles such as pillars or other players. If you swerve around the object well enough and get the object between you and the shell, then the red shell will collide with the obstacle and not you. You can even do this with players and use them as a shield from items coming up behind you. Red shells will also only follow a set path and so can be evaded by taking alternative routes after it's been fired, such as on Rainbow Road and Mute City. Blue shells can't be outmaneuvered directly, unlike the red shells. Instead, you have to rely on your awareness of the minimap. The blue shell doesn't target anyone until it's about 2/3 through the field. If you spot a blue shell early on, hit the brakes and drop back to second place. If done correctly, the shell will target the new person in first and you can sweep back past them after they've been hit. However, if you're too far ahead to drop back fast enough, you are better off driving as fast as you can to gain enough of a lead that it shouldn't matter if you've been hit by the shell. Finally, we get to the green shell, the spawn of Satan itself. Everyone knows that one person who loves to blame the game for cheating. They are of course wrong, except for green shells. Green shells employ a mechanic called Lucky Bounce, in which after the shell hits a wall, it will align itself to cross its own path with another player's path. On most occasions, the shell will hit the player and of course lead them to drop back. Now I have a way of dealing with this if I ever find myself confronted with a green shell without any items. If you are exercising good spatial awareness, then you should be aware of when a green shell is about to collide with a wall. Just after the shell collides with the wall, I actively swerve to change my path out of what it was when the shell first hit. Doing this causes me to no longer be lined up with the green shell's path, and a promising portion of the time it gets me out of the situation. It doesn't always work, but it's still more effective than leaving it to fate. Of course, if you have a little more time on your hands to react, then it's easier just to watch the shell and drive out of its path. But if things are tight and it's not looking good, then give this a go, and it could be the difference between winning a race and not. Learning the tracks. This is something that will come in time. The better you know the tracks, the better you can predict item boxes, corners, shortcuts, and other players' movements. Familiarity of the things in the game that never change will make it easier to deal with the things that do, and lessen the things you have to be thinking about, such as things as driving lines for each track. Don't shy away from the tracks you don't like or are not good at. Make an effort to play playlists of only the tracks you hate to become better accustomed with them so you know how to deal with them well enough when they inevitably show up. Practice. Consistency is key to getting good points by the end of a session, and familiarity with the game and its various mechanics and strategies is the best way to achieve this, and you achieve this through practice. I find the best way to do this is to raise hard CPU or enter an online lobby. If this is too hard for you to start off with, then try lowering the AI difficulty and the CC until you start getting consistent wins. Once you start winning consistently, build up the difficulty until you're at your hardest.